Thank y'all for tuning in. Thank y'all for just being engaged. Justin, what's going on? And I'm actually gonna start this interfaith off just with a slight shift, a way that we can get engaged with each other. I've done this with my previous students in an oral sense, a person to person, but one of our distinguished guests, brought this great advice and suggestion on how we can get engaged with each other and just to get your minds thinking. Um, Hey, Sharon, Cassandra, what's going on? Um, this is going to be more of a mind run. I'm going to say a word for those tuning in, for our audience, and maybe for the next 10 seconds, marinate on what comes up, and then type it into the chat. So if I say the word justice, what comes up? You don't have to type it right now, but just think about it. What comes up? And then you can type it in. We're seeing a lot. Long overdue, not realized sometimes. Connecting to local cases, fairness, mercy, a great scripture from the Christian tradition in Amos 5:24, equity, peace. Something that's wrong, being made right, ongoing fight, a struggle. All of these are giving us the idea that many of us have different definitions, different perspectives, different soil that we pull some of these meanings from, and that's really the overarching background for interfaith forward, building new bridges together. I want to welcome y'all once again for just tuning in. I know that was more of a sample in terms of letting this type of topic marinate in you. It's meant to make you hunger for more, to get your mind thinking, which is why it was such a beautiful suggestion made by one of our distinguished panelists. And y'all gonna get to meet them. Y'all gonna get their social security number, all of that information. But for now, I would just want to welcome y'all to Interfaith Forward, building new bridges together. A big shout out to Pitt Live, Stephen, Ashley, Sharon, Graham, the entire family from University Events and Special Ceremonies for making this possible. Pitt Wire Live, as we are quarantined, is a way for us to engage with each other, the Pitt community and abroad. Regarding this times, and for the students, for those who may not have different areas to engage with, you can go to Pitt Wire Live and see a different array of activities and areas that you can kind of fuel yourself with. And as much as we engage the body, as much as we engage the mind, which we're going to do today, we would be remiss if we didn't engage the internal, the spiritual, the soulful, however you identify and categorize it. We have layers as people, which is where my office comes in. My name is Emiola J. Oriola, running the department in the Office for Interfaith Dialogue and Engagement. And we have been doing these sessions for the past few months as a way to engage the Pitt community on topics, on interfaith topics. They're really human topics. And for the last month, we've been talking about holy days, religious holidays, and not just from a 10,000 foot view and Wikipedia and Googling it, but we've really been bringing it down to a 10 feet on the ground level and actually talking to people and engaging and understanding lived experiences rather than simply the what. So we get at the why, we get at the who, we get at the where. We try to understand people a bit better. And today we're taking a shift from that. Usually we focused on April just being a month full of different holidays and holy days. But well, technically we're taking a shift, but we're still staying centered on understanding people better. We want to make sure that we're relevant and connected with what's going on in our current world. And with the ongoing theme that we've had, step into my shoes, the journey of our neighbors. Instead of celebrating a specific holiday or worldview, we're going to be talking about fighting for justice. And the reason why we're doing it is because in our country, we know we're engaged with people who come from different worldviews. And as we've seen all over social media, the news, everywhere you have a screen or a connection, the tragic and unjust deaths of Breonna Taylor, of Ahmaud Arbery, of George Floyd, and many others have not only sparked protests around the world for change, but discussions within communities about injustices that occur against marginalized communities and people of color, specifically our Black and African-American neighbors. And as always, for us to gain real progress as a society, we always emphasize that we need to match the brave feet marching for justice on the outside with courageous and hard conversations about injustice on the inside. And to do that, we actually need to talk to people, not at people. We need to listen to people to understand, not simply to respond. So with that being said, we're going to shift the conversation. If you have any questions or really pertinent comments, you can go to the Q&A tab button at the bottom of your screen. I'll see that, and we'll get to those questions at the end of this session. We're going to run a little bit longer than we usually do. So this won't be 30 minutes, just because we wanted to give this type of conversation and my wonderful guests just the opportunity to really give some brief but rich answers and expressions to their lived experiences. And all three of our guests, I know personally in different ways, but I'm just blessed to have them here, not just because they're people of color, not just because they engage the Pitt community and do different work in different sectors, but because of the lived experiences and basically that wisdom that resides in them that I know personally, and many people may know professionally or socially, but one of the goals is to bring voices to the forefront and actually have discussions, not just panels where people give answers to not seem stupid or to make themselves seem right. We want to make sure that we actually dig into some rich answers. So just to introduce our wonderful panel, one of my really good friends for a good amount of years, Nathaniel Carter, he's the founding director of This Generation Connect, has been doing a lot of great work in communities. I was gonna just touch on Braddock, but he's been doing it in a lot of different communities. And I'm just happy to have him on this session right here. What's going on, Nathaniel?
What's going on, sir? Thank you so much for having me, man. It's a privilege to be with you.
My man. Where are you calling from right now?
I'm actually in the center. Yeah, I'm at the center. Tuesdays is our give back day. And so we have people that are about to come in and start preparing the meal for the community that we started since COVID started. And then we also have the produce giveaway. And so, yeah, I'm here. That's where I'm at.
My man. I'm gonna make sure I give y'all more information on his Connect Center. But if you want to talk about somebody who's doing real work within the community, Nathaniel's the person to go to. So I'm blessed to have him. And we got our own little group me and chat session with our other mans, Pastor Anton Coleman, and we just be acting a fool. But I'm blessed to get the wisdom that we share in our group me and our chat session on this air. And next, just want to bring up one of my good friends that I've had the pleasure of connecting with since I started working at Student Affairs, Dr. Ahmed Ghuman, my man representing the Counseling Center. What's going on, brother?
What's up, man? Likewise, what Nathaniel said, I appreciate you bringing this together and giving us an opportunity to connect and just share some of our lived experiences, and hopefully they can inspire and influence everyone that's tuning in today. So appreciate that.
It's my pleasure, man. It's my pleasure. Where are you calling from right now?
My bedroom. TMI.
Those are sacred grounds, man. Those
working from home. Working from home. So
yeah. I hear that, man. I hear that. And just shout out to the entire university counseling center. Been doing great work. Ahmed, along with many of his colleagues, have just been spearheading a lot of the great initiatives with really taking care of people. And the shift to the online engagement platform has been pretty tumultuous just for everybody, but they just been doing really great work. And I'm excited to have him on here because we have our conversations as well. So it's just a pleasure to bring that to this platform. And finally, Raja Sooriamurthi, even though he ain't at Pitt, he's at CMU. I know him personally, his wife, his family, and just seeing some of the wisdom that he dropped prior to us even getting on this call, and even his humility with just engaged in this and his desire to engage the community. I'm happy to have him here. So what's going on, Raja? How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Yeah, like the other panelists, I'm delighted to be part of this, and thank you for putting it together. It's unfortunate that we have to talk about this, but it is a very appropriate thing to discuss this afternoon. So,
absolutely. I'm grateful because your work precedes you, not just you being a professor in information systems, but the fact that we know how you connect with your students so well, and you actually bring these type of conversations to them instead of just sending them to a space where they can have it. You bring and merge real life together. And that's really the background, as I mentioned, for this type of conversation, is not simply going to what we may deem as experts around justice, because justice is a form of lived experiences that people do need to express. And that's why I mentioned before, we're not just going to be in the clouds, but we're going to bring it back down to our level. I don't want to say the common people's level, but people who are going through things that many people may just simply go to books to learn about, and while they may be avoiding people. So Nathaniel, I'll start with you. I guess just we know that interfaith is our interfaith work is bringing together people who are from different worldviews. And so I guess if you can share with us who you are. I know who you are, but briefly, I guess what has brought you to this point where you're at with the Connect Center, and how that may have intertwined with your worldview, your faith, and kind of where are you at right now, personally, professionally, from your faith background with what we're dealing with. So that's a loaded question, but I guess kind of peeling off a couple of those layers so people can get to know you a little bit better.
Awesome, no problem. So I grew up, just kind of a little background. I grew up in a Pentecostal tradition, and faith-based tradition. And so growing up in a faith-based, in that institution, so to speak, really engaged into biblical texts and the understanding of biblical literature. However, in that space for me, there was a little disconnect. The disconnect was the fact that we oftentimes only included those that believe the same biblical theology that we did. And so we only fellowshipped and worshiped, hung out with, so to speak, those that were also Pentecostal, those of the Pentecostal persuasion. And so growing up, there were a lot of, in my opinion, missed opportunities because for me, I've always been one, from a biblical standpoint, how do we engage the community? How do we engage other people outside? If we're saying that what we have is good news, how do we engage others with this news? And so there was a disconnect. And so at a young age, I oftentimes would ask, how could we as a church begin to engage the community? And oftentimes a lot of those opportunities were shot down. And so as I grew, I began to kind of make relationships with other people of other faiths. I ended up going to Waynesburg University, where I studied, and I have a minor in biblical studies from there. They are a Presbyterian church, a Presbyterian university, Christian university. And so I had the opportunity to build relationships with, of course, Presbyterian leaders and Presbyterian friends. And to be honest, people of other faiths, because it just wasn't Presbyterian individuals that were there. And it actually helped my worldview as it relates to Christianity, because of the way in which I grew up. It was very narrow, so to speak. And so it allowed me to grow a little bit. It allowed me to kind of blossom and to see a bigger picture of God. And so with that, I always had this desire and passion to do community work, because of the lack of that happening in the church context where I grew up. One of my goals growing up was I want to eventually have a community center where we are engaging the people, because I believe that especially as believers, without a community, there's no church. There's no people to serve. There's no people to engage. There's no people to help show these different principles in new ways. And so with that, that had always been a desire, a heart's desire to be able to do that. And so I then, after Waynesburg, I then became the youth pastor, young adult director at a church, which was an interdenominational church here in the city of Pittsburgh. And I served there for about 4 years. Afterwards, stepped into a church plant position where I did that for about 2 years. And all of that was surrounding community work. And so church looked different, especially during the church plant. It was a lot of community initiatives and so on and so forth. Then I stepped away from that after 2 years because I began a business, which I am the founder and owner of currently, which is called This Generation Cares, rather. This Generation Cares is a organization that does residential living facilities for individuals with intellectual disabilities. And we also work in the housing market as well. So we have individuals that suffer from homelessness that we assist them with housing opportunities and so on and so forth. And from that, about 2 years ago, I then created what is known as the nonprofit This Generation Connect. So This Generation Connect is also is fueled through the business sense, so that we're able to kind of do the mission and the vision. We're located in East Pittsburgh. The center is located in East Pittsburgh. We actually purchased it was a former bar, and we transformed this bar into a community center, a community space, remodeled the entire space. And so we are now at a space where the community has access to the space. In a month or so, Lord willing, there's no third spaces in the community of East Pittsburgh. And Lord willing, in a month or so, we will be opening one of the first third spaces here in the community. This is also the same community in which the national phenomenon of Antoine Rose happened. And so this is that same community. Actually, the police station is in the same plaza, literally five steps away from the building that we are in. And so, which I also had an opportunity to be a part of that. Actually being the one who officiated Antoine Rose's funeral, being really engaged and strongly engaged with the community and his family. And so that kind of brings us to where we are now, to your question. Basically I see that all of us have different roles that we play for justice and injustice. Some people's roles are out there to protest and to be change makers in the street. But I also believe that there are other roles that are oftentimes not talked about, not uplifted, such as how do you change the process on the inside? How do you then become owners, and how do you change the narrative of the culture where there's a political climate that is happening, but how do we also serve justice on a community climate as well as a more individual family-based climate as well?
Thank you for that, Nathaniel. It's just knowing you and seeing your progression and your journey, and how many things many gaps that we may have when we're younger, that don't make the connection. It's actually that opportunity for us to make that same connection. And that just brings, when you talked about just the transition, Ahmed, we've discussed this before, but your time at Pitt, though it's been brief, has been filled with a lot of changes, where I told you you're like an innovator. You know what I mean? Well, not like an innovator. You do a lot of like taking what's there and like, all right, let's see things in a different way. How can we make this better? Collaborating, doing partnerships, and it's not reactive, but it's pretty proactive. I guess with your journey, whatever you want to share just about you, and what brought you here, I guess, how do you see your position and your gifts regarding what's going on, especially from your own worldview, and your own background?
Yeah. Well, I was hoping I didn't have to follow Nathaniel because he went hard right from the beginning. So, no, I appreciate it. So I grew up in Philadelphia, right outside of West Philly. People are familiar, right in the 69th Street area. Very diverse community, huge Black community. So my whole life I was just immersed in the Black community, just the friends growing up that grew up in my house and vice versa. So I've always been around diversity and stuff. It's nothing that's made me uncomfortable or anything like that. But so that's always just been a part of me. So then I moved out here from Philadelphia, and although it's not as diverse, but there's a level of diversity in Pittsburgh as well, which I've appreciated and connected with. But for me, like, I think everything in my life, for the most part, is influenced by like my Islamic faith. As a Muslim, there's a lot of teachings around justice and legal authority and just morality and stuff that I try to follow, which helps me. It helps me maintain a level of accountability. So I think that's what Nathaniel was saying, is like, how can we start to look at ourselves and take ownership of just everything? I mean, and I think a lot of times, like, what's going on right now, it's really, it's upsetting to a lot of us and stuff. And I hope we continue to hold on to that, that pain and anger and try to work toward change, because it's easy, unfortunately, it's like the next thing happens, the next thing, and then we just shift perspectives. Even just recently, like, it was 24/7 coronavirus, and now like the past week, it's nowhere to be found. And in that time, there's been like 10,000 more deaths, but like people are forgetting about that and moving on about it, and how that impacts us. So, for me, I think what's really important in terms of that personal accountability is, like, I think a lot of times we care when it hits home. So a lot of times until it hits close to home, it doesn't really wake us up. So I think if we want to be true, like, social justice advocates and really care about people, like, you have to care even if it doesn't impact you or your community. And as a Muslim, I think for me, it's important, like, whenever you see injustice, and no matter what community it is, but, religious, racial, sexual communities, I think you have to, advocate and be supportive, and especially stand up against inequality and oppression. And I think a good example of this is, and I'm sure I've been guilty of this as well, is like when Stephon Clark was murdered in Cali, in the Bay Area, Black people were upset. And then like a week later, people found out he was Muslim, and all of a sudden the Muslim community came, now all of a sudden we're upset because he's also Muslim, right? So it's like, low-key I cared before I found that out, but still, like, how do we care from the beginning? Like, how do we care just because an innocent life was taken, not because I can now identify with that innocent life? So I think for me, it's about, just really supporting people and advocating for others. And I think that's where, like, true humility comes, and that's how we can really start to work together and stuff. So, like, it's amazing seeing all these different people out and about protesting and stuff, but you really got to take personal accountability and, check yourself, check the people in your circle, and speak up. We're all in group chats with people who might say things, and, we might overlook it, but I think that's where, like, the change truly starts, because you're changing yourself, you're changing your circle, and then, it continues to trickle, versus like something big like this happens, and then we go out and we create a post and stuff like that. And that's all important. But, I think how do you continue to maintain that lifestyle and that lens through which you kind of move throughout just life and your experiences and accomplishments and just all those things. So.
No, that's real. That's real, Ahmed. I appreciate you just for being transparent with your own disposition regarding certain instances. And I think you touched on something big in terms of just how we identify. It may seem we may make it distant to us, but until it kind of hits home, that's when we'll pull it in. And just for me having conversations with different colleagues and friends, kind of realizing like, hey, you're black. You know what I mean? It's like, well, yeah. When did you realize it? You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, this can happen to you. You bike a lot, you jog a lot, you do that. I was like, well, yeah, that, you know what I mean? This has all been happening, but it hasn't really hit home. And I think just with engaging people, Raja, you do that work of bringing the reality of what may going on within the community to your students. I guess if you can share with us where that desire and where that passion has come from, even from your own journey and your own worldview, and how that has shaped your hands, and how that has shaped your hands and your posture regarding justice, because you have your hands fully submerged in it while still working in a professional standpoint. So.
Right. I guess I've been very fortunate in many ways, and my entire journey till date has obviously shaped my views. But to give that in a nutshell, to describe like what are the forces that have molded me, is that I was born in India, and I first came to the United States when I was 3 years old. My father was doing his PhD in physics, and I did all of my elementary school education here in the US. And when my father finished his doctorate, he didn't want to stay here. He wanted to go back to India and take care of his parents, that is my grandparents. And so our whole family went back. And then I did my middle school and high school and college in India. And then I came back here for my master's and my PhD. And I've been here in the US for about 30 years. And as an academic, I've had the opportunity to travel to various countries in the world and so on. And this has definitely molded my views on justice. And I'd like to, like as an academic, I have the opportunity to mold the minds of the next generation that's emerging out of our colleges, and to give a little bit of my sort of a little bit of a utopian perspective on this is that that exercise that I suggested that we do at the beginning, I did that myself, and I was just thinking about like, what does justice mean to me? And the words that came up were fair, blind, swift, appropriate, automatic. And then when I was thinking more about it, like, well, why do we have justice in the first place? And there's a victim, and there's somebody who perpetrated something on the victim. So there's a search for compensation. And the view also is that justice should hopefully be a deterrent for whatever it is that happened. But when I thought more about it, is that the context in which injustice happens is always a context in which there is inequality, when there's a perception that I am different from you. And that's where I feel I'm very fortunate, having grown up in two different cultures, the world's largest democracy and the world's oldest democracy. And even academically, I've moved between, I've been a faculty member in a computer science department and a business school, and now I'm here at Information Systems, and CMU is the third university that I've been at. And I've had this wonderful opportunity to see sort of different perspectives. And that's one of the things that I try to advocate very strongly to my students is that, okay, keep your eyes open, always have very strong opinions, but don't be opinionated. Be open to the views and the perspectives of other people. And as Stephen Covey illustrates in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of the things that I strongly advocate to my students is to seek first to understand, okay, before making yourself understood. Okay, see where other people are coming from. So the injustice always happens in an environment when there is inequality. So what I do wonder about the utopian world when we don't need justice anymore. And I'm not talking about the lack of justice as it is right there, right now, but saying that we just don't need justice because injustice doesn't happen anymore. And so that is, I think, where the root, where I feel as an educator that I will be able to get that to my students, where I will be able to, as it's come up in many, many conversations this past week, nobody is born a racist. Everybody is born, okay, accepting that all people are the same, and it's gradually the paths through which people's lives take them that different views and opinions, okay, come in. And I feel I have the opportunity to plant the right seeds or the appropriate seeds in students' minds. And one of the things that I'm a very big advocate of is a saying of Mahatma Gandhi, where he said that be the change that you seek in this world. And that's the thing that I push very hardly on my students, saying that whenever you see something that is not right, definitely speak up about it, but then do know that at one time you will be in a position to do something about it. And at that time, don't forget that sense of injustice that you experienced, and you now have a chance to do something about it, do it. And so I'm of the view, I'm a diehard optimist. I'm of the utopian view that eventually one of these days we may come to the point where we don't need justice because there is no injustice. Okay, and whether that happens anytime in anybody's lifespan or so, that's a different question, but I think at least that is the goal that we should be moving towards. And one step in moving towards that is a sense of equality, that is, all people are the same, irrespective of the color of their skin, their ethnicity, their religious beliefs, their gender identity, and so on like that. A person is a person. And the moment that we are able to respect and identify that, then I think many of the other issues that we are dealing with, they sort of fade away into the background and they basically become non-existent. And as a professor, I feel it's part of my responsibility to bring these views to my students and have a discussion of these ideas in my classes.
Thank you, Raja. You said something really pointed that hit me when you used the metaphor of not just molding the minds of your students, but sowing seeds. And, you know, the seeds usually take a long time. And I was talking, just me being a poet, I think in metaphors, I always say, like, as we're sowing seeds, do we also have to uproot some that have been there? Because as a lot of my colleagues and friends have, who are white, have been becoming more aware, and just people of color in general, who may not be entrenched in a lot of stuff that's going on right now, they become aware because of how televised the death of Breonna, of Ahmaud, and especially of George Floyd. But one of the instances that really sparked, I guess, some introspection for me, and even some fear, thinking about the seeds that have been planted in many people that ponder about anti-Blackness, is the situation that happened in Central Park, where the young woman, the young white woman, didn't want to put the leash on her dog, and the Black gentleman told her to because the rule said so. And she basically used, I saw like that seed that was in her, kind of, that was maybe hidden, rise up and say, you know, I'm going to call the police and say that African-American man is threatening my life. And he videotaped it. And Nate, I want you to, I guess, what is your perspective, not just on justice, but the injustices that we may be seeing that may be buried, where a lot of our brothers and sisters who may feel like they may not be racist, they may not be discriminatory, they may not have prejudgments on people, or prejudice on people, as that woman said after the Central Park incidents, that said, you know what, I do diversity, I do inclusivity, I do all of these buzzwords. I guess, what is your perspective from your worldview and your journey, I guess, regarding some of the seeds that people may not even know may be planted in them? Because they're taking a lot of good seeds in, protests, you know, dealing with a lot of stuff, and just being proactive, as Ahmed said, getting out there, but the real work being done inside. I guess, what's your perspective on how, not just you, but how people can unearth some of those seeds that may be hidden in them, that they may not know may come out in a Central Park situation like that?
I think oftentimes I listen to people's words, and words are powerful, and they kind of lead and lend itself to the heart of a person. When if a person to me says that they do this, rather than, I don't, for my faith, I don't do Christianity. I am a Christian. And so recognizing the fact that it's a part of who I am, it's not something that I have to be intentional to do. Now, the part of living the Christian faith is something that causes intentionality. But when it says that I do something, I'm very intentional to ensure that I'm doing that. And so I say that and bring that as a point when people are very adamant to talk about what it is that they do to identify themselves to not be a racist or to not be a person that promotes injustice. I really believe it comes into the way of living, the way of life, the way in which you do life, the way in which your worldviews are framed and formed. And until our worldviews are framed and formed in such a way that it immediately and automatically identifies with the Black culture, where we're able to identify with the white culture and the other, not just the white and Black, but the other cultures and the injustices that they also encounter and embrace. I think it really speaks to the heart of us as a people, us as individuals. For me, how do I feel about that? I feel as though there has to be intentional relationship. And until there are intentional relationships with cross culture, there's not going to be the honesty and the genuine relationship of understanding the plight. Because a lot of people are being moved, and we're thankful for the acts of them being moved to march with us, to yell for us, to scream for us. But the truth of the matter is, the relationship is, how do you stick up for me when I'm not around, right? You're going into rooms that I may never be allowed into for the next 5 years. And when you step into that room, if you're my friend, you're going to make sure that this policy, that what is happening is not going to affect me in a negative way, but you have me and us at the forefront of your mind as a way of advocating for equality always across the board. And so I think thinking about those small nuances, which really makes a bigger, which makes a bigger argument that you can stand with me, but the truth of the matter is, or the question that I have is, when I'm not here, or when a Black man or woman is not being killed, are you still speaking up for me in your boardrooms, in your spaces, in your, no matter where you are? So.
Thank you. It's you said something that triggers the word advocate and ally, and that's been thrown around, not just with you, but for you in spaces that you may not be in. And Ahmed, we've had personal conversations just between us and our worldviews and how we grew up, and that's always one thing that I would identify with you as like we have a real relationship. And I guess from your perspective and just how you're shaping a lot of the minds and the places that you're going to, I guess what's a barrier that you may see that's stopping people from really being an ally and a true advocate and actually forming those solid relationships? Because like I said before, innovative is your middle name, and you have a knack of just connecting with people that some people may say, hey, I don't know how to empathize and connect that well. It's just your personality. I guess what's your posture on that?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to answer that, but I want to just add something to the earlier question around the seeds and stuff. So, a lot of us have unconscious bias that continues to impact us, and we can be down for the cause and be as diverse as we want, like we still hold it. So I would encourage everyone here watching after this, go take the Harvard Implicit Association test, pick a group, any group, pick yourself. Like, you might find that you hold biases against your own identities. Like, it's pretty fascinating. but we all hold these because no matter how much we care and how much we work, like we're still socialized to believe certain things. We're exposed to messages on social media and the news and just everywhere growing up. So like that's where, you know, you start to really do the work internally, and to see those seeds that you then have to uproot, like you were sharing, Amiola, like it starts with us, and knowing that we have it. And then, you know, and then just like to answer your question, I mean, I think it's privilege. Like we often have the privilege not to care. We have the privilege not to get involved. And, you know, like, I think what's also important, like something Dean Bonner shared in one of our earlier meetings, is like, even as minorities, we may often hold privilege. So me sitting here today, like you know, gender privilege, heterosexual privilege, socioeconomic privilege, and I'm still a minority, right? But then how do I use that privilege to then still advocate and to, like, you know, promote justice for other people that might not experience that kind? Because I know a lot of times, especially in this conversation, it's been a lot about like white privilege and white allies and like what are white people doing, but really it's like what are all of us doing, right? Because we all are in a space, not all of us, but a lot of us in our place of privilege that we can do things to really influence and encourage people. So for me, I think the barrier is not necessarily people don't care. I think people do care, but I think sometimes because of our privilege, it limits our ability to truly understand what is really going on. And like when Nathaniel was sharing, like until we have those honest conversations with others, like how do you really know? Like you might be downtown bumping into people and all that stuff, and that's powerful, but then like, is, you know, you have to talk, you have to get to know people. And a lot of, and I do want to point this out because I know like a lot of times, you know, like we only see negativity, we're only exposed to all the harm. Like there's so many wonderful people, you know, in America, so many wonderful white people and black, all of us, like, you know, humanity overall, I think there's a lot of goodness in it, but we're only exposed to just the vile, evil, hatred. And then we start to think like, all of a sudden we start to generalize like all the, you know, all of this group is bad, all of that group is bad, you know, like we get it, all Muslims are bad, you know, it's like, but it's not true. So instead you start to talk to people and expose yourself to people, how are you ever going to know? And, you know, and there's a lot of research that shows that like 60% of Americans have never met a Muslim. Well, I guarantee those 60% of Americans have probably never talked to a black person or, you know, like other people too, right? So how do you know? So that's where you start to like, it's the contact hypothesis. You start to talk to people and it starts to break down those barriers and misperceptions and stuff like that. So, I mean, it starts with us, but we also have to own our privilege, like we own our, like our minority statuses and some, you know, those challenges. We also have to own the times where we're actually in the majority, and how we can do that to continue to, you know, promote justice. So.
I'm a sucker for metaphors, and when you, as y'all can tell, and when you talked about seeds being sown and just privilege, there's a quote. I don't know if it's Ava DuVernay. I think I'm messing up her last name, but y'all know who she is, and she I think gave a quote that says, you know, Raja, you touched on it, how none of us are born racist, but she said, you know, many times it's the air that we breathe. You know what I mean? It's the privilege just goes in your nose, and you don't even know that you're benefiting from it, just like you're breathing. You don't even know how precious oxygen is. You don't even know what it's doing for you. So to somebody who, quote unquote, may have metaphorical asthma and may not have that privilege flowing through their nostrils and their lungs like that, and you're like, hey, what's the problem? You can't breathe? This is oxygen. Like, I have air just like you have air. And Roger, since you, I guess, brought that great metaphor of just how we're not born, but, you know, even Ava bringing it that we breathe it in. How is your posture right now? Because you have the benefit of, like many people, but because you're more seasoned, you have the benefit of not just being in the community, but as an academic, not just living in the US, but in India. And just with your time, I guess, what is your posture right now regarding engaging people who may be fatigued, who may be tired of having this conversation on both ends? So you may have one person who is, say, a Black person who is going through this and saying, you know what, I don't feel like having these conversations anymore. I'm tired. And you may have somebody else who is also tired of having a conversation, but for completely different views, saying, you know what, I don't want to engage in this. You can breathe just as fine as I am. You need to fix your quote unquote asthma. I don't benefit from this type of air. Like, how do you engage both parties? Because you do this as a professor dealing with students who come from different backgrounds.
Right. It is a very a challenging question, and Given that I think we're probably on a clock, let me just sort of discuss like one or two things that I do advocate to my students. And as I said earlier, just to summarize that, I think that the need for justice arises when there is injustice, and injustice arises in an environment where there's a lack of equality and there's a sense of difference, like you are different from me. And so, and that then also arises from the sense that in some way or the other, I am a victim. And I'll elaborate on that in just a bit. But there are two things that I suggest to my students, and being a professor and doing this for a living, I do not want to give them just ideas, but I very much try to give them like practical things that you can do today that will probably help you on this journey. And one of the things that I suggest to my students all the time is that the best way that you can help yourself is to help others. In that service mentality, just forget about who you are, and in whatever way that you feel you can do it, just do it. Like this may be going to the Red Cross and donating a pint of blood. This may be on a Saturday morning, waking up and going to a soup kitchen and helping serve people. Whatever way that it is, do it not with the anticipation that you're going to get something back, but because it is the right thing to do. Because what I advocate to my students is that you can never help somebody without in some way or some form helping yourself. So one way you really want to help yourself, go all out and help other people, and you'll be amazed as how it comes back in unexpected ways. And it opens up your mind, the sense that, okay, all people are created equal. And once you go out and do the service. The other thing that I'd like to advocate, and I know we're also short on time, but I'd like to take this opportunity to reach out to people, because this is something that I have found very, very helpful in my life, something I've been doing for the last 22 years. And pretty much all of my students who have been through my class, they know that I talk about this at one time or the other. And that is, okay, another way of how to avoid a sense of victimhood, how to avoid the sense that I am being wronged in some way. And that is to appreciate what it is that you do have. And the thing that I suggest to my students sometimes goes under the broad umbrella of a gratitude journal, but I tend to call it as an appreciation journal. Now, I don't just leave it at that. So if I could take about 2-3 minutes of this forum to discuss it, because if I were to tell my students, hey, all of you should write a gratitude journal, hey, okay, it doesn't make much sense. Okay, but then what I want to do in the next 2-3 minutes is actually give the mechanism of how I do it. And what I always tell my students also, I do not give advice at all. I just share about what works for me. And if it works for you, then so be it. So what I found is that this is one way of, okay, going through life where you get a better appreciation of what it is that you have, and as a result of which you're able to better appreciate other people. So the idea of, at least the way that I do the gratitude journal, is that it used to be a file on my computer, but now it's a Google Doc. So it's just one bookmark away. I click it, it pops up, and it is a stream of consciousness. I just type down 5 things that I am happy for, I'm grateful for, that I appreciate. It could be something as simple as, hey, these shoes are really comfortable, or I enjoyed the tea that I just had. And if you are thinking for more than a minute, you're doing it incorrectly, is the way I do it. And I call this as guerrilla writing, as in the warrior and not the monkey. So it's a stream of consciousness. You go in, you type 5 things, boom, you close the Google Doc and you get out, you don't even think about it there. As I said, if you're spending more than a minute or more than 2 minutes on it, you're doing it incorrectly. If you do not spend like I need to do it at 8 p.m. every day, no, whenever you occur, I may be sitting at the airport, I'm waiting for my flight, boom, I fire up my gratitude journal, type in 5 things, and I close it. If I forget to do it one day, so what? If I forget to do it 2 days, no big deal, okay? And so on like that. Whenever I do, just type in, and as I said, it doesn't take more than a minute or two, but what my personal experience has been, and this is something I've shared with many of my students who've also written back to me, is that your whole outlook changes. Okay, suddenly, okay, you don't feel about what are the things that you are missing in life, but you start to appreciate what you do have in life. And the lack of the ability to appreciate what we do have in life, as I think is one of the things that leads to all this injustice and so on that we have, because we suddenly feel that, hey, that person has got something better than me. And then there's certain weeds get planted in our mind, the ones that we've been talking about that we have to remove. So one way of de-weeding and planting healthy fruit trees in our mind is this gratitude journal, something that I personally have found very, very helpful. So I just wanted to mention it has two things that I would like to offer as concrete suggestions for the audience in this panel. Something like, if you're doing more than a minute or two on the gratitude journal, it's being done incorrectly. So, but the benefits of that are enormous. And the way that I view it, it's like taking a vitamin for the soul. Okay, like a teeny weeny vitamin can do so much for our body. This does so much for the soul and your outlook in life. The other one, just to summarize what I said earlier, everybody, if we can look for opportunities to serve other people in whatever way that we can. It could be as simple as opening a door for somebody when we're entering a building, or helping somebody with their shopping bags when they're going to the cart, or whatever way it is that we can. And okay, we always have this mindset is that, how can I help somebody? And because that's a beautiful thing that I noticed in this culture. We don't necessarily have it, at least when I grew up in India. When you go to any office or anything like that, the first question a person asks here in the United States is, how can I help you? Okay, and rather than asking that question, I feel that we should go ahead and help people to the extent that we can. Okay, I'll pause here because we're probably running.
So. I appreciate that, Dr. Sooriamurthi.
I talk for a living, and so
I think we all of us on this call, you know what I mean? Wisdom is on our lips, and I'm just amazed as we'll finish and get to this question and finish off that. Dr. Sooriamurthi, you mentioned the gratitude journal, and Nathaniel and I, just coming from the Christian background, we always talk about how it's better to give than to receive, and just seeing what he's doing. And then Dr. Ghuman, how we just engage with each other, because gratitude flows from you. You know what I mean? Even the idea that we did for one of our workshops for diversity and inclusion, the gratitude tree that Ahmed brought up was a huge blow up. Like it was just wonderful. People loved it, and it was like, I'm gonna do this in my office, etc. So I just see not just the interfaith engagement as a benefit, but the ideas are very interconnected about how not just that is it when I think about the word selfless, is not just thinking more about yourself or less about yourself, but thinking about yourself less. And actually being grateful for what you have, which I do want to encourage, that it's a great way to protect and flourish joy, because in these times right now, it is very difficult to still be joyful and to still have an optimistic view and to still cling to hope, however you do identify. So to finish off, we have one question from one of our audience members. I'm gonna ask y'all just to give a 30-second spiel to it as we finish off. It says, it's from a student, actually, a student I know. What's going on, Noah? He said, a lot of young people profess interest in various causes on social media. How can we help them translate that into tangible changes in their community? A lot of young people, as we know, express and profess interest on various causes on social media. How can we help them actually translate that to real, tangible change? Nathaniel, I'll start with you, because you know your hands and feet are in the community. How would you approach this type of question and interest from a student who does want to be a part in a tangible way?
I think it's twofold. One being, the student has to be confident about what they're called to do, because there are various cases, as mentioned, various causes. And I think one of the issues is the oversaturation of jumping from one cause to the other. As you mentioned, we have the pandemic going on. We have the police versus blacks going on. And then even in our culture, I think I shared this with Jay earlier this week, just in my home community, there were 3 individuals three young men that were shot down by each other. And so those, if not if not in a right headspace, you will become overwhelmed, which I did. I became overwhelmed with knowing there's all of these things that are happening in the community. How can I be effective to all of them? And then I had to recenter myself to realize that all of those causes aren't what I am to be focusing my energy on. And so I'll say, you know, recognizing where your energy is supposed to go, and recognizing the second thing is who would best utilize your interests. Because if you don't recognize who would best use it, you'll easily become uninterested looking for the new thing, the next thing.
That's really good. Ahmed, I guess, how would you approach that question from a student perspective?
Yeah, and I do want to give a quick shout out to the gratitude journal. So as a mental health professional, it's
It was
actually,
real.
it's actually, I can talk about gratitude for hours, but it actually is a positive psychology intervention to treat depression. And it's been like proven to be effective for that. And it can be done, it's done, you know, it can be done differently, but that's definitely start practicing gratitude is a great way, as Roger was sharing. But I mean, to answer this question, I think get involved. There's so many grassroots movements. There's so many already established community organizations, nonprofits in the community, in our backyards. And I think just get involved, reach out, see how you can help. You know, you might, if you're active on social media, you might be able to run their social media pages for them, get them involved, raise awareness. Crowdsourcing money, like it's so easy nowadays to set up a way to, you know, raise money on social media and stuff like that. I think all those things matter, especially if you're young and looking for ways to get involved amidst all your other busy schedules and social life and all that. And like Nathaniel was saying, like it's easy to just like hop from one cause to the next. You know, what's really meaningful to you? You know, what can you see yourself dedicating your life to, and what means a lot? And start there, but definitely, you know, support one another in our causes. So that's what I would.
That's huge.
Sure, yeah.
Raja, if you can, I guess, finish us off with some words of wisdom. I know you mentioned it before, but some tangible ways that a student may take to actually translate their interest into actual action.
Right, and I think there are many ways in which it can be done, and everybody has to find out what it is that will work for them. I think, as Nathaniel pointed out, is not to spread oneself out too thin. But some of the ones that I would concretely would suggest to people, especially the younger generation, one is that I think just about every society, there's always a shortage of blood, and I mentioned this before. So a very simple thing that you can do once every 8 weeks. If you try to do it less than 8 weeks, they won't take it. But every 8 weeks, donating a pint of blood, then you can do it at the Red Cross. And they're very, very nice people. When I was a graduate student, I did it for many, many years. So that's a small, it probably take half an hour of one's time, but it can have enormous impact in terms of the people who may need that. And especially if you belong to a rare blood group, then it's all the more important. So it's something that you could consider. Another thing that I would highly advocate is that every place, except, okay, nowadays we're probably not running them, but soup kitchens are a wonderful place to go and volunteer. They need muscle power. They need people power to be able to just lift crates and put that down and to serve people and so on. And I would say there are very few things that make us appreciate how much more we have in life when we go and work in a soup kitchen and realize, wow, just look at what I have and compare to, okay, what it is that, okay, many people in society, for whatever reason it may be, they don't. So pick a few things and go with that. And whereas I'm a person who advocates nonviolence, I'm also a person who strongly advocates that when you see a good fight, get in it. Okay, and so when you see something that is worth fighting for, definitely, okay, get involved with that and express that. And one of the things that I would say, and which also came up here in the Q&A, that I would highly advocate to everybody who's listening on to this call, independent of however it may be that your political inclinations may be, I think it is a responsibility of every citizen to exercise their franchise. So come November, here's one very, very small thing that you can do is to vote and also help to get out the vote. independent of the political parties. I'm not talking in any way or form about one's political beliefs or affiliations and so on like that. But we live in, that's one thing that I think we take for granted. We live in a society in the United States where we are able to vote. And that's something that does not happen in all the countries here in the world, and something, it's one of those things that we just take for granted, and sometimes we don't think twice about it. So I would say small things to start off with. Think about donating blood. Okay, volunteer in a soup kitchen. Come November, definitely vote and get involved in good fights on campus.
I couldn't have finished it better. Dr. Sooriamurthi, my brother Nathaniel Carter, Dr. Ahmed Ghuman, it has been my pleasure. I know y'all personally, so I'm gonna shoot y'all emails and all that after this. But I'm just really grateful for the gems that y'all have dropped, the vulnerability that and transparency that you've exposed yourself to, and the realness of this conversation, of the discussion. Just want to emphasize to our viewers, to those who may have not caught this, go to Interfaith Pitt at YouTube. You can see the recordings in the next couple of days, not just from our previous ones, but from this session. As always, we're going to go to a shifting slide, but every week we'll be back Tuesday, 3 p.m. with Interfaith Forward, Building New Bridges. We'll stay on the theme of Step Into My Shoes, a journey of our neighbors. You have to wait and see what we're going to talk about again. But as Dr. Sooriamurthi mentioned, get into a good fight, do what you need to do. Do not spread yourself thin, but it is a benefit and a privilege to have this conversation. So do what you need to do to even give up your privilege for the betterment of all those who are with you and will be coming after you. With that being said, peace and love. We will hopefully see you next week. Y'all have a great day.
I mean, I think we might need to have a part 2.
Man, I was, well, first of
All right,
all,
we're good, guys.
Yep, we're good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was getting,
I'm gonna stop recording.
are y'all comfortable with me If y'all do not know Mason
You got the
Beverly,
mood
you do
going
not
here.
know. Oh, this Mark, yeah. If you don't know Mark Morrison, come on, y'all. Welcome, everybody. Definitely log on. Tell your mom, your pop, your brother, your sister, auntie, uncle, grandmother, grandfather, niece, nephew, bird, cat, dog, hamster, gerbil, parrot. Some people have parrots.
That's right.
Definitely let us know who you are, where you're from on the chat as usual. We want to make sure that we acknowledge you for just being on this session. As you can see, it's not your typical university session. We're all at home or somewhere where we reside. So we got to relax. I usually do these music messages. So this is Mark Morrison, Return to the Mac. I said it to our wonderful guests. We cannot be together in cookouts and barbecues, but you know, music is the easiest way to redesign an atmosphere. So
Absolutely.
something to get you going.
Yeah.
We're going to begin in a couple minutes. Just want to remind y'all that this is being recorded on YouTube. So if you missed this episode, or if you have a friend that hasn't seen it, go to Interfaith Pitt at YouTube, and you'll be able to see our past episodes. So this episode will probably be available within the next few days. So I want to make sure I emphasize that. Hey, Carrie. Shout out to Hillel, always showing love. Always showing love. Huh? Thank y'all for tuning in once again. So all you need is some good sweet potato pie right now.
Some potato salad.
That's all you. Come on. Mm-hmm. That's all. Some good mac and cheese made by the right person.
Can't do everybody's mac and
That's
cheese.
the caveat.
Yes.
Yeah, you can't do that. You can't do that.
That's the first question. Who made the macaroni and cheese?
Oh, that's good.
You want some mac and cheese? Hopefully we'll be able to eat that with each other. Ahmed, you know my dance moves are right.
Don't hate, Ahmed. Don't hate. Don't hate.
He mad because he can't dance. He can't
right.
dance.
Don't hold back.
You know.
Missing you, Ahmed. Missing you.
See, we know that. See, the truth comes out. The truth comes out. Music, I've realized that music and dancing and just a lot of things that can bring people together are the quickest and sometimes the most efficient and effective way to bring people together. One of the perfect ones is food, which is why we mentioned mac and cheese and some collard greens. See, I'm getting hungry, and some sweet potato pie. But all of that stuff is really just a bridge meant to unify us, and that's really where our office comes in. My name is Emiola Jerriola. I am the program manager for the Office of Interfaith Dialogue and Engagement here at the University of Pittsburgh, and where we fit in with Pitt Wire Live. Obviously, we are quarantined at this time, though our levels have shifted, and in that time, it's hard for us to be together in person. So Pitt has done a great job of just formulating a platform where students, staff, faculty, community partners, the entire Pitt community can engage with each other and learn different things, grow, not just from the external report, but from the internal side. And that's where we come in, because we cannot forget what's going on inside us. So we've had a myriad of different guests on our show for the past few months, where we've been talking about different interfaith topics. And in April, we specialize on just religious holidays and holy days, where a lot of different faith communities have been practicing. And though they were able to do it in person, we wanted to make sure that people learn not just about the actual holiday and holy day, but about the people who practice it. Just as we've been doing for the past few months, just digging into the different layers of identity. We would be remiss if we weren't sensitive to what's going on in our community, in our country, and around the world, which is why for the past couple of weeks, we've taken a shift, not from focusing on people from a religious aspect, but focusing on people from a human aspect, because this is happening to everybody. We're all experiencing this, not just a pandemic from a virus standpoint, but a pandemic from a racism standpoint, which is why today, just as last week, we're focusing on justice, injustice, and we have a great group of guests, of friends, of professionals who just dig into this type of work, but in their own respective way. So with that being said, I'm gonna ask y'all, as y'all are typing into the chat, individually, to mine, to the guests, we're gonna shift to our actual session. I'm reminding y'all that this is being recorded once again, so you can go to YouTube, Interfaith Pitt, to look at our past episodes. You can go to our website, interfaith.pitt.edu, to see some of the work we have been doing for the past couple years. So we're gonna shift. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom box. If you have a question, if you have a comment, feel free to put it in there, and we should have time by the end to get to it. It's always a rich conversation that we have on Interfaith Pitt, building new bridges together. And this has been our theme: step into my shoes, the journey of our neighbor, and not simply celebrating religious holidays, but fighting for justice. We obviously have taken a break from our usual rhythm and pattern from our shows, but because of the tragic and unjust deaths of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, they're actually Rashad Brooks in Atlanta, who was murdered at a Wendy's. I believe 2 men were hung in Southern California. The names go on and on and on. And these have not only sparked protests around our world for change, but discussions within communities about injustices that occur against marginalized communities and people of color, specifically our Black and African American neighbors. And I've mentioned this before: for us to gain real progress as a society, we need to match the brave feet marching for justice on the outside with courageous conversations, hard conversations about injustice going on the inside. And we can only do that together. If y'all have been to my office, you've seen the quote: if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And our goal is to go far, so we don't repeat the same patterns we have in history, which is why we have 3 really, really, really dope, wise, honest, and just people who have lived experiences that just don't need to be heard, but need to be spoken. And they're all 3 friends of mine. So I'll start with my good brother. He's a faculty member within the Religious Studies Department and Jewish Studies, is on our professional Interfaith Advisory Board. You can see him doing different talks around campus, but he's a good friend of mine, Dr. Brock Baylor. How's it going?
Going very well. Thank you so much for having me as part of this.
My pleasure, my pleasure. I already know you stay watching the Interfaith sessions, so it was just a pleasure to have your voice. I talked to you on a personal tip within our board, and it's just been a blessing, so I'm glad to have you here. Where are you calling from?
I'm from home. My dog's right next to me. Hopefully she doesn't bark at some point. And my kids are downstairs playing an online video game with some friends. So
it's the best way to keep them busy. I got a bone for you and I got a video game for you. So I appreciate you sectioning off some time for us, man. I know it's busy on your side, but I'm thankful. And I just want to introduce one of my big sisters. I've known her since I was an undergrad, but she's made leaps and bounds for Pitt as an institution, but specifically student affairs. And she is the coordinator for CCLD, cross-cultural and leadership development. She's an advisor. She's the chair for the Diversity and Inclusion Committee within Student Affairs. And she's a mover and shaker in her own right. To my sister, Shadina Harper. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. And yourself? Thanks for having me.
I'm good on this side. I'm good on this side. As you can see, she has such a chill demeanor. This conversation, I might start leaning back, grab me a little drink. We was talking about food earlier. So this is really just a conversation with us around this table. Shadina just has that effect of bringing you in. So as y'all are watching, don't be surprised when you start leaning back, when you start getting more closer to the screen. She has that effect. Where are you calling from, Ms. Harper?
North side.
Shout out to the north side. We still up in Pitt.
But by way of the HILL.
Okay. Shout out to the, you gotta throw that in there. Gotta throw that in there. That's how you know where she really, really from. Well, it's a blessing to have you, and just to
Thank you.
To bring it to a close. One of my good brothers that I've had the pleasure of meeting with in the past year or so, that his name has actually preceded him, and it's kind of like when two sparks meet, you can recognize real. And it's just been a pleasure to get to know him and where he's come from. My brother Jesus Orgel, he's a campus minister for student athletes at CCO Campus Ministry. And as I've met a lot of the students that he mentors and he talks to and he pours in, your name precedes you, my brother. So I think it's a pleasure to have you on here. How you doing, man?
I'm well. I'm excited to be a part of this conversation. I have headphones on to keep the noise limited here. My kids are a bit loud and crazy enjoying the summer, so try to keep it limited here.
I ain't mad at you, man. I appreciate you for just sectioning off this time to really engage with us. I know you got a house full of people. You're constantly moving your feet, but I'm grateful to all three of y'all for really just taking time to talk. And as I mentioned before, this is many times I had the suggestion, why don't you do a panel conversation? And many times panels have good intentions, but it's really a paragon, it's really a spokesperson for an entire group trying to speak over people and not trying to sound stupid and trying to give the right answers. But many times you can't have that. You need rich discussions where you can kind of get in messy places, and you may not have a right answer, but it's not for people to get to know ideas. It's for people to get to know people. And despite all that's going on in the world, we would be remiss if we didn't dig into some of the stuff that's going on. So, Brock, I'll start with you. Just given, because I think it's important for us to actually get to know people that are sharing wisdom and sharing gems with us. I guess if you can tell us, I guess briefly, your social security number. Yeah, I'm just messing with you. If you can share,
let me write that down real quick.
He's gonna start right there. I guess if you can share a little bit of your journey, I know you personally, but a little bit of your journey of how you've come to this point where you are right now, teaching and kind of molding minds within the religious studies department, and how you're, I don't want to say internalizing a lot of stuff that's going on, but seeing as though you're on the Interfaith board, you've been doing this work for a while. I guess where are you right now internally with stuff that's going on? So I know that's a big one, but I guess letting people know who you are and how you are.
Oh wow, where do I start? Real briefly, my PhD is in philosophy, and I teach in religious studies department. So I'm technically the resident expert of philosophy of religion. And I didn't originally plan to be in academia. I thought I was going to be a minister when I was growing up. I kind of saw the dark underbelly of church politics and left working in the church. That was right after my undergraduate. And then in grad school, when I decided to pursue philosophy, that was the first time I ever had an educator that was African American, was in grad school. Wow. And that says a lot about my upbringing. At both private Christian schools and in public schools, I never had encounters with people of color. I grew up in Indiana, and that African American man was George Yancey, who used to teach at Duquesne, and he's a well-known philosopher of race. and that really changed my life. And it really forced me to start doing the work of unlearning any of the racist practices that have been habituated in me due to the fact that I have to come to terms with the fact that I've had a white supremacist education, that I'm part of a field. I mean, I have a PhD in philosophy, which is basically the most white supremacist field in academia. The canon is all dead white male Europeans. And 80% of philosophers in America are white men, right? So, so for me, I see my personal work of unlearning racist habits as deeply intertwined with my academic work, and how I try to create spaces of rest for my students who are people of color, and to challenge my white students on thinking about the legacy of white supremacy.
I appreciate that, Brock. It's I appreciate your vulnerability and your transparency, because it's one thing to speak one-on-one, but to kind of open yourself up to people who are engaged in the conversation with you. But you mentioned a key piece in education that I think we miss, and just in being a human as you grow, many things you have to unlearn, and that's a painful process, but it's doable when you have a mentor, when you have somebody beside you saying, you know, the more you're emptying, the more space you give to be filled with something, and it's going to be scary, but it's going to be beneficial to you. And that just it's a great transition, because after knowing Shardina for a while, I see she does that work, really getting, not just in student affairs, but within the community, of just kind of getting into the messy places and helping people, both who look like her and who don't, both who have been doing this work for a while and who are brand new to it, from a staff standpoint and a student standpoint, really learn some new things. And Shardina, you being a native of Pittsburgh, I guess, you know, we can tell where Pittsburgh has its hands on you. But if you can share, I guess, where you've had your hands on Pittsburgh from your journey, coming to where you're at now, and where are you at now? How are you, I guess, processing a lot of the stuff that's going on, not just from your background as a Black woman, but from your faith background, from the different backgrounds of being a native Pittsburgher? I guess, how are you processing?
Yeah, so I started probably third grade when they started to move folks out of the community, going to different schools outside of your community. So I ended up in Squirrel Hill. You know, I was a rambunctious kid, you know, and so some white teachers didn't necessarily know how to deal with those type of, you know, my kids with my behavior. I came in not necessarily understanding, because the way people taught was so much different than what I had been learning prior to. And so I found myself kind of being acting out behavior-wise, right? And so I think that was my first, unknowing though, I was just like, Miss So-and-so just don't like me. I don't know why, she just don't like me. She's mean to me. I think, but in that, I grew up in Squirrel Hill and then went to Rogers, and I never knew racism, right? Other than that, I mean, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't identify that as racism. And even I often share, even through high school, my best friends were the Van Landingham twins, 2 white girls. Those were the only people my mom would allow me to spend the night over their house, and vice versa. Their mom was my mom was their mom, and we were best friends. And then I went to Duquesne, and my eyes were open. And I was devastated, because I think that I was one of those Black people until I went to college that said, this stuff doesn't happen.
Sure.
This is not real. This stuff is not real. And so when I got to Duquesne and my eyes were open, got involved in their BSU and did a lot of work with that, and have been on that road ever since. Never thought that I would be at Pitt doing this. I too was on the road to being a pastor, you know, but you know, God takes us through different journeys for different reasons. And so, you know, now I love doing what I do. I love when I see students, you know, who come in looking strangely, and like, what are you talking about? And then the light goes off. And I love seeing that happen. I love, there's no money in the world you could pay me for that experience. You know what I mean? Like, it is just a phenomenal thing. And I love because, I just finished a session with some college students just now. And the fact that like, they're so, you can't, my objective, my main objective first is to teach. I'm not going to assume that you're prejudiced. I'm not going to assume that you're racist. I'm going to teach you. I'm going to teach you different because I understand that we all may not have come through a multicultural environment, right? And so I enjoy what I do. So that's how I came to be where I am now. I am, I often talk about this place of where I have these blinders on like that horse. And so there's some days where I have to put the blinders on. There's some days where I can't watch the news. There's some days when I don't want to, because my job right now is to help my students work through this, right? And so I can't come to the Zoom or to the table really broken. So then there's some days where I just have to just stay where I am. There's some days I wake up crying, just keeping it 100. There's some days when, my brother is in law enforcement. I'm so concerned about him, he also jogs, you know what I'm saying? There's so many things. And so, I'm, as a woman of faith, I know what changes things, and that's prayer. And so I have asked God to not, you said it the other day, I think, Emiola, in one of our, like, to not harden my heart, like not make me angry and start to say all cops are this or all white people are this, and I've just had to ask God to continue to massage my heart, that my motives will always be pure, and my motives will always be censored and defined and focused through Him. And then that's the way this love, this love thing can be, can be brought forth.
Wow. Dina, I appreciate that, and you dropped a few gems, just in regard with how you engage and how you process. But you said something very, very just tangible that hit me when you said how you engage students, and you love to see that light go off. You know what I mean? You love to see like, hey, I don't care how you came in, but I'm gonna keep pushing. I'm gonna keep teaching because I know a light can go off in you. And Zeus, when we met, I've seen you. I told you how your name like preceded you. Nah, man, this brother put like he pushes and he challenges, but you can really see his love for students. And you deal with student athletes, and many times they're an outlier on a college campus because their whole life is focused on sports, and many times they may not feel appreciated, they may not feel welcome. And I've seen, just with coming to Pittsburgh, to be very honest, and we've spoken about this, how Pittsburgh has a very polar binary, it's white and black, you know what I mean? And we may leave people as outliers who may not fall in that tradition. I guess if you can share a little bit about your journey, not just coming to Pittsburgh and seeing its binary reality, but also engaging students that may feel like outliers and may, truth be told, not feel appreciated. Not simply for the performance that they do, but for the person that they are, especially when real life situations are going on, because you approach them not just from a faith. I've seen you approach them not just from a faith perspective, but it's driven from a human perspective of love. And that's like very hard cement to kind of crack through. After 20 years of, living life. And then this guy comes in talking about, no, I'm gonna get to you. You're not just good at what you do, it's the person. So I guess that's a loaded question, but you can tell a little bit about your journey, because you live in a special place where you engage people.
So I grew up, I'm a West Coast kid. I grew up in Arizona, born in Phoenix metro area, born to an immigrant woman, raised by her. She was a single parent. My grandfather was my father figure. So from the get-go, my life was very nuanced and complex. And that's kind of a theme throughout this whole process of how do I hold this complexity in my life. And so in terms of a racial conversation, man, that hit me off. I mean, I remember early on in elementary, I spoke very broken English. And so I remember being taunted because of that, and kind of having this complexity of going back to visit family in Mexico and then coming back to the United States, and having this tension of not feeling Mexican enough to my Mexican family and not feeling American enough to my American friends. And so like I wrestle with, how do I hold my face in the midst of this tension, and where does my identity lie? And so that was a narrative that kind of unfolded through high school. And when I got to high school, that's when I came to faith in Jesus Christ, and that's where my identity lies in now. But it certainly became more complex in that as I learned theology and kind of that nuance, like, you know, wrestle with really like the cancel culture, right? Like Jonathan Edwards wrote some brilliant things on theology, but yet he was a slave owner. So how do you hold that? So really just having this, again, this theme, this narrative, how do you walk in complexity, and how do you hold that, right? And so now, as you said, my job with students is not to mold their minds to match mine, but to help them find their own identity, find their own story. I think it's very important for ourselves to be able to name our story and share our story. I think it's powerful. And so that's what I really get energized about the student athletes, is helping them find their own narratives and put words to their story, because I think it's a powerful platform that they have. And I do that with my own children, who are very ethnically diverse. We've adopted, we're foster parents, and so our house is very diverse. And so even having that conversation indoors. So kind of an encompassing answer to your question, but.
No, that's Zeus. I appreciate that, because I've been trying to find a way to kind of articulate what I'm going through. And when you said like walking in complexity, dealing with that, because, you know, you may not be so much this to be accepted here. You may not be so much this to be accepted here. And just, you know, I was talking to one of my Black colleagues earlier today of just, you know, being in a land where you're like, no, I'm from here, but I know this land doesn't really accept me so much. And even talking to one of my white colleagues and saying, you know, like, I don't know how to deal with this complexity. I've become, as Shadina said, the light has went off, but now I really feel bad, because it's like I've been hitting the snooze button for a good portion of my life. So how do I help you? How do I engage? Am I being moved by guilt, or is this actual transformation? And Brock, as you work in academia, which is just a very heady space, and as you mentioned before, you know, a lot of your grown up has been sectioned off with just a various homogeneous background. So I guess, how are you? Because personally speaking, I've seen you make major strides, not just from your departmental side of getting stuff out there for your colleagues who are white to understand, but also from a faith background as well. So I guess, how are you wrestling with that type of complexity? Because I see you going forward and doing major strides, but I also see, you know what I mean? Like it's tough to hear another name, and you're like, this is crazy. How do I get other people engaged? So I guess from a personal side, how are you walking out this complexity? Because I know that's been on your heart for a while, since you have been in this work, but you still know the identities you hold as well.
Yeah, I think that comment about complexity is really, really important. And two things come to my mind. You know, it's not both and, it's either or. You know, there's a really great article about Ibram X. Kendi going around right now about how education's not going to fix it, love's not going to fix it. We have to change the systems and the structures. You know, and I agree with that, but you also have to educate people to understand what systems and structures are and how that's different than individual acts of racism, right? So education is not a panacea, but there is an educational component there that is in order to help students, help me have the right tools to know how to situate myself and know how to address the situation. So both and, right? I think that's a really important component, right? As an educator, I do need to be challenged to remember just educating my students. Reading a book isn't enough, but as an educator, it's also my role to educate people, right? And then the complexity, you know, going to kind of the way Zeus talked about, right? I don't see it as cancel culture to point out that David Hume and John Locke and Immanuel Kant and G.W.F. Hegel and all these philosophers were white supremacists. I see that as unlearning the revisionist history that has only pointed out all of their achievements and has just kind of swept under the rug all these aspects of their thinking, right? So let's just look at one of them, right? So Immanuel Kant, he believed that morality was based on your capacity for reason. And then Kant thought that Africans were incapable of reason. So he thought that they were not human and not capable of morality, right? So this is actually not just a side issue, but it's actually critical to his entire project, right? About what he thinks being a human is, and what reason can accomplish. So that doesn't mean we stop reading Kant, but our reading of Kant has to be informed by the totality of his worldview and the situation in which he lived. And so that's really what I want to help students achieve as they wrestle with that. And I'm, as an existentialist, I can't give you the perfect answer. Like, you have to continue to live in the complexity. Like, we might not have a perfect answer, and we just have to keep living with that.
Wow. I appreciate you bringing in Kant, because he's an example of a worldview that shapes who people are. And I remember talking to a friend earlier this week, and she mentioned, the move to defund police. And she said how much, negative feedback she's gotten. And she was like, people can't understand when so much power is being given on one side. What does it is an institution above critique? And I'm not saying for or against it, but the whole idea of just analyzing not just the work that we push up from a person or from an institution, but also looking at what things aren't so nice. You know what I mean? Even within a worldview, even within the faith, you know what I mean? What is not just what looks good, but what doesn't look good. And I think you made such a great point of that challenge of living in that complexity that's hard for people to do. And Shadina, I know you live in that work of basically that tug of war, where people don't want to let go of things that are foundational in them. And just with the recent deaths that we've mentioned, but they can go back to Rodney King, and this can go back to Emmett Till. This can go back to not just Black people, but people of color, and just seeing how fixed it is in our nation, not just from a faith perspective, but I guess, how are you interpreting justice right now as you see it, not just from the slow process of police getting arrested, but you mentioned you have a close family member who's a policeman. Like, how is your interpretation of justice and or injustice right now with your many identities? Because it's a tough place to be, but I know that's where you live.
I think personally, I come from the perspective of changing the heart. Injustice is so embedded in our country, and it is so systemic that it's embedded. And so with something so deeply rooted, the only way is to try to help people see that this is a human issue and not necessarily a political or systemic, if you will, issue. This is our inability to treat each other like human beings. And so, and I come from the perspective of whether you agree, disagree, whatever, at the end of the day, we all have red blood going through our vein, and we're human. And so my perspective has always been like, I love to challenge based on not sexual identity, not religious perspective, not, political perspective, but as a human being, how should you treat that person? As a human being, how does it work? Like, forget about how you were raised, but how should you be treated? And I had a student just now in this last session, and she said, we talk about pronouns and the importance of people using pronouns. And she said, well, I don't feel no kind of way about it. And I said, what if someone came to you, she was a Black student and she had hair, and said something about your hair, you know, and wanted to touch your hair and said, oh, that's just ridiculous. How would you feel? Oh, she got irate, right? Oh, no. I said, but how do you think the person that may be in this Zoom call feels when you said so flippantly you didn't care about pronouns, which is a part of their identity? Boom, the light went off, right? And so it's like changing the heart. It's like, you know, and I told the people, the students today, you can't put yourself in my shoes. And I didn't even talk about as a Black woman. I talked about a woman who's big. You'll never know what it means to sit on an airplane and be kind of nervous about, you know, people being comfortable around you. You'll never know that unless you become my size. And so it's trying to help people understand that, like, there's injustices that go on everywhere, you know, but right now, this thing with our brothers and sisters of color, like, I'm very appreciative that the sheet has been taken off, and that it's no coincidence that we're all home. Everybody is home in quarantine. You couldn't say that George was resisting, running, committed a crime. There's no way in the world that, you know, you could justify what happened to him, any of them, but specifically this one. And we're all home and we watched it, right? And so now I think everybody's eyes are really open to the injustices of specifically police brutality. So yeah.
Dina, you made a great point of just, you know, working in your sphere of influence. And your sphere of influence is very individual, it's very one-on-one, it's very heart-to-heart and person-to-person, you know, rather than somebody who may be at a political level where they can change systems. You just made a great point of, you know what, I see it as a heart change. I'm gonna go after that root from a person-to-person level to help people understand, you know, what does it mean to treat people as humans, and just changing a perspective. And Zeus, knowing a lot of institutions have a lot of Black students, a lot of students of color who are student athletes, you know, it's tough to engage them, you know, to say, hey, you need to keep going while everything is going around them. It's hard for them to maybe see themselves as appreciated when the world doesn't see them as appreciated or even worthy. Or many times we're having a conversation of, do Black lives even matter? You know, and to me that that statement, the fact that it's up for debate and conversation is like, we're just talking about matter. You know what I mean? That's this is a hard light to flick on. I guess how are you engaging and interpreting justice and injustice, not just for yourself in Pittsburgh, but to the students who you cater to, who may be of color, who may be Black, but to the ones who may be white, who may be not of color, trying to help switch on lights and switch off lights so students may not harden their heart, you know, to the world, while other students like, no, I need you to open it up to it. So I guess how are you interpreting justice and injustice from that perspective?
That's a great question. So I kind of to stick with this whole idea of like sharing our own stories. The more you are able to articulate your narrative, your shared experiences, what it does is it elevates your level of self-awareness, right? And so as a leader, I can't lead students past where I haven't been myself. And so that is my launch off point is if I haven't had an experience, and I own it, like, I am sorry you experienced that. I can't walk in those shoes, or, you know, as you tell the people that step in my shoes, but I can empathize you on a human level. Absolutely. Right? And so that, I would say that's my angle as to how to engage these ideas, these concepts, and really speak life into students. Man, like, you are worthy, you hold value, and help them understand that, because it is hard, especially as a student athlete, when you're bombarded with your schedule, I mean, for all intents and purposes, their identity is tied into their wins and losses, right? And so even kind of unpacking that, like, what is your identity, your ethnic identity mean for you as a student body, or as a student in the larger student body at Pitt? And so, I mean, the conversation goes a lot of ways, but kind of engaging there now is my approach.
And I know that's a going like a fish upstream. You know what I mean? Because you may just receive a lot of resistance, but you know,
Sure.
when I tip my hat because that's a road that's not too traveled too often by educators and people who want to pour into other people in dense situations. And I love your perspective and your approach of even sharing stuff that's going on with yourself. I remember a colleague of mine actually called me this week, and we were talking, and you know, he's like, I want to understand what is it like to be Black, and I was like, well, how much time do you have? I'm not sure how much I can divulge and stuff, but like,
Right.
you know, I may have been seen as the comfortable Black guy, you know, but you see me in a suit and a dress shirt. You haven't seen me in Tim's and a hoodie, and you don't really know some of those. Like I tell you about, oh, your doctor and all that, but I didn't tell you about like when I got pulled over by the cops and they said there was a warrant out for my arrest and there were drugs and guns in my car, and then came back after 30 minutes and said, we're joking with you. Don't get in trouble, and toss me my ID back, and 4 cop call. Like those type of situations were the norm. And you know, his mouth was like, oh, this is for real. And it's like, yeah, my doctor didn't mean anything. My faith at that time didn't mean anything to them.
Yeah.
It meant something to me, but it didn't mean anything to them. And when I shared that experience, it's kind of like, oh, this happens to somebody I'm close to, that I know. It's not, you know, George Floyd all the way over there. It's not a Breonna Taylor I don't know. It's somebody that I do know. And
Yeah.
I guess, Brock, I want to ask you, how are you, I guess, engaging with people who want to do something? You know what I mean? Because the next step, when I spoke to people saying like, oh, you know, justice and injustice that's happening to our Black African-American brothers and sisters, that's happening to people of color in this country of various worldviews, I want to do something. And my response to that was, I think you need to like sit on it first. I don't want you to like have a check mark. I need you to sit on it first. And I've gotten a lot of resistance on that because, you know, people like to do stuff. I guess from your perspective, because you academia is a very mental warfare. You know what I mean? It's a you're throwing shots and you don't even know, but you're engaging people in a way where you have to climb over a lot of landmines and walls. So I guess, how are you engaging people with what they should do now, or even if they should do something?
Oh man, I really like your point about sitting and resting, especially knowing that there's a long history of a white savior complex. Doing something is often, I think, a way for white people to, you know, give themselves a pat on the back and feel like, and basically, it's a way of recentering the whole conversation around white people all over again, or it can be. So I think it's really important to think about, to take a moment to think about, you know, what are my motives for going out there and doing something? You know, is it just you know, try to ameliorate this kind of white guilt that I have, or whatever it might be. And I think it's also important to create space for people to grieve, right? So one of the first things I did during the week of George Floyd's killing, Gabby Yearwood, who's in anthropology, he and I held a Zoom meeting for just some of our former Black students, our African American students. And we just tried to create some space of rest. So it wasn't about like, what are we going to go do now, or what book do you need to read? Although I've done some work with regard to that too. And I just wanted to hear students like, you know, what's your desolation right now? What's your consolation, if you have any? If you don't, you know, that's okay, because our society is not really good with the language of lament. We don't have very many spaces where we have where grief is considered appropriate. And even in those spaces, you go to a funeral and it's called a celebration, right? So we need spaces for lament and grief and anger. And so I think starting with that was really important. And I do think learning is still important. And so one of the things I've done is I created a very lengthy list of resources. Almost all are African American scholars. It's on the Religious Studies website about the history of the Black Church, history of white supremacy and the construction of race by white Christians, and anti-racism. And so part of that goal was to amplify Black voices in that. And that, again, that's about listening, right? So for me, it's about putting myself under the leadership of Black voices. So, and when I go out to protests, listening to Black people and not viewing that that space as my space to colonize again, but learning from them about how I should be involved in that practice.
That's huge, Brock. I appreciate you for providing those list of resources on the Religious Studies Department website. And you mentioned just that listening point of not just doing it, at a protest, but doing it within your own department, within your own authentic life. And to me, that's huge because it calls for humility, which is something that's hard for everybody to do. It's a fruit that does not want to come out. But it's needed. And for me, even with the office, when we talk about interfaith, we all talk about my message is building bridges so relationships can develop, because it's much easier for me to share and receive when I know you. And Shardina, that's something I know that you do well, is establish and sustain relationships. But one thing I've seen just with the relationships you have and the relationship we have is it's not just cultivated in love, but within that love is a place for correction. Because I think many times people say, well, I love you, you love me, but why are you telling me this? Why are you exposing this? I thought you loved me. And it's like, well, I think I think your definition of love is like to make you feel good. When James Baldwin said, like, if I love you, I have to tell you about things you're not aware of. And many people will push that back, saying, you know what, I thought we were good faith friends. I thought we were good Christian friends. I thought we were good Black friends. I thought I have a Black friend. I have somebody who's smart. Why does your love look this way? So I guess what piece of advice that comes from your own life of making and sustaining relationships with people who look like you, who don't look like you, who believe the same thing you do? And one thing you do well is making relationships for people who don't believe the same thing you do, but I still see those relationships thrive to the point where they'll say, hey, Dina, I feel this type of way. And you'll let them know X, Y, and Z. And they're like, it's a hard truth, but I receive it because it's coming from you, because we have that equity. So I guess what advice would you give to those who saying they may think they may have friends, but if that relationship has no space for truth, then is it really a relationship? I guess, what advice would you give just from your own work that you do?
Sure. So I'm a member of a sorority, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and we have Fortitude. It is a statue, and she kind of stands with one arm out and one arm back. And I remember when our centennial, and I went to Howard University and I looked at the statue, I got this revelation about how she was standing in terms of like relationships, in terms of, like as she's reaching up, she's having people who I aspire to be, right? People who are like, I just want to gain this wisdom, or I just want to gain these skills from this person. So somebody that I really look up to. And then the body would be my road dogs, people that I could just relax and be myself with, right? And then the back, she's reaching back to help somebody else, to pull somebody up. And so my way is I need the person to do this. I need to aspire. That helps me grow. That helps me continue. But I can't hang around people all like this because I'll start to feel less than, right? And then I need these people because I just need a place to rest. I just need a place where I can just be me. But these people tell me when my stuff stinks. These people tell me when I need to get it together. You know what I mean? And these people hold me accountable, right? And then but I can't really stay here too much either because I'll become comfortable, right? And then I got the people that this hand is reaching out to, the ones that I'm pulling up. And I got to continue to educate, to empower, to enhance their lives in whatever way that I can. But guess what? I can't stay there too long either because I'll become their God. And I'll become and feel like, hey, I got it all together and look at what I'm doing. So it's important to keep all three communities, if you will, around you to kind of keep you balanced, right? Because, you know, I do believe I still got to grow. I still got so much to learn. I still have to move forward. I still got a place that I need to rest. And I do need to be able to help others. So, you know, that's the bit of advice that I would have, is to keep all of those different people around you at all times. And you definitely have to have somebody that you could be naked in front of. You know, I definitely have somebody that I can just be like, look, I had a rough day and I need a drink. And then that person say, no, you don't, let's go to the movies. You know what I mean? You know, and I have to have that because that's important for my growth and my mental stability.
Wow. It's just the different communities and different people who serve in different manners. But you touched on something that, you know, I think Zeus brought up, of just being able to be transparent with somebody and say, this is where I'm at physically, this is where I'm at mentally, this is where I'm at emotionally, this is where I'm at spiritually. I'm venting this to you. I hope to receive wisdom back that I know will come from love, but it's going to contain some truth. And Zeus, I know you do this for your students. I guess, who in your context, who does this for you? How are you creating space for yourself to sustain? Because many times as professionals, we're catering for students. And as Brock mentioned, our job is to educate. And even for me, I get lost in work, you know, emails, I have to do this, I have to do this stuff. And it's like, I don't want to I don't want to go down with the Titanic. I don't want to get lost in everything that's going on in the world that seems to be falling, and not take care of myself in the layers that I know matter to me, which is spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically. And as Shardina mentioned, she does this. She has somebody who does this for herself as a professional and just as a person who sits between a rock and a hard place in terms of the work you do. How are you finding ways, or do you have a community that really uplifts you with those type of waters that you need? And I guess what advice would you give to those who are saying, you know what, I'm a loner here, or I feel I don't have close friends, or I'm an introvert, or like this is not, I can't be naked in front of anybody.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I'm a very introverted individual, and so my wife has helped me push me out of my shell and learn to value community. And as I've done that, man, I've seen so much fruit and health come from that. And so I have a group of guys that we text and call just to check up on each other. My pastor has been my mentor, and so just even running things through him has helped kind of stabilize my mental health in the midst of such crises that we've seen. And so for somebody who's maybe feeling like they don't have community, I mean, I would say, like, you have 4 people on this Zoom call that you could reach out to on campus. And if you feel like, man, you want somebody else, we could definitely refer you to people we know, at least 10 people, each of us, that we could refer to help you out. And so there is no lack of community that we can help build around you. And I'd say it's very important to seek that and to find that. And I would say lastly, I think what's important for me in the context of injustice and race, sorry about that, for me personally, was to learn to name my own biases, right, and to my own prejudice, to be able to have open dialogue and transparency. And so that was very difficult for me to kind of have that introspection of, man, what are the areas that I need to allow God to search my heart and reveal that are hindering the message of the gospel. And so learning to lament like the Old Testament prophets, and learning to call out racism like the Apostle Paul did with Peter. And so again, that all that is heavy work. And if you don't have that community around you, man, it's easy to grow contempt towards the other person. And so, again, holding that complexity is being able to have that community where you can speak it without allowing it to grow as contempt within your heart.
I can make a whole diamond mine with the type of gems you just dropped. And one thing that I want to push before we finish, that Zeus uttered and mentioned, is the need for community. And I know this quarantine has sometimes emphasized our desire to be cloistered, and to connect with people on a superficial level. But in regards to whatever faith community you do involve yourself with and you do identify with, whether it's different philosophical communities, spiritual backgrounds, community is very important. Having people that you can be, as Dina mentioned, naked and transparent with, that you can receive honest feedback. And as Zeus mentioned, be very introspective with yourself, where you can call stuff out. And maybe you may need somebody to help you along that path. You have us on this line because we mean what we say and we say what we mean, but you have people on campus. There are people around you that can help. And I just think that's really, really important that you mention, because a lot of work needs to be done at a system level, also needs to be done at an individual levels and within our own sphere of influence. So Zeus, I just appreciate you for dropping that gem. And before we finish, I'm going to ask y'all just with one word that you can give to describe what you see, where you're at and where you want to go. One word to describe where you're at and where you believe you're headed, from your faith background, ethnic, nationality, etc. We'll get to this message and this question, and then we'll finish. So I guess, Dina, I'll start with you. One word to say where are you at, and where are you headed?
Pressing.
Pressing. Pressing is where you're at?
Mm-hmm. Where I'm going is the promised land.
You try to get started. All right. You try to get started. Brock, I guess one word of where you're at, and then one word where you're going. Where are you headed?
Pressing was good. The first one that came to my mind was becoming. Just recognizing that this is a process, and which also helps with being empathetic toward the people that you think, oh, why can't they just get it? Because like, it took me a while to get where I'm at too. So becoming, and where I'm headed, I mean, that's a place of uncertainty. I mean, I don't know where I'm going to wind up at the end of it, right? We don't know how we're going to get there entirely either.
Uncertainty and become, man, if y'all didn't watch that Michelle Obama documentary on Netflix, you know, that get me right there. But Zeus, one word, I guess, where are you at and where are you headed?
Yeah, I think at the moment, the word would be patient. And as I engage people in the spectrum of racial competency, I just remind myself that cultural competency is a journey, not an event. And so just learning to be patient with people. And where I'm going, I love Dina's answer. You know, I hold on to Revelation 7, right? That people of all nations, tribes, and tongues will be gathered as a multitude. And so just a beautiful picture of what is to come.
Wow. Just that idea of just real unity and not uniformity, where people can actually be themselves. And we'll finish it off with this question. A student asked, on the top of creating spaces for students, how well do you think the university has risen to this challenge, especially during this time of social distancing? If anybody wants to share a couple words, that's a deep question, but I guess how well do you think the university has risen to the challenge, especially during this time? Anybody who wants to share?
I can only speak to the student athletes, but I know that the coaches have individually done a great job of facilitating Zoom conferences with their students when they're on their teams, to have a process to check in how they're doing emotionally. And so I know that my crew we've done that as well with the students that we meet with one-on-one and our big groups on Tuesday nights. So for the student athletes, there's definitely been a healthy, consistent follow-up.
Thank you, Zeus.
Yeah,
Dina,
I would
Brock.
agree. I think that, within student affairs, as Emiola can attest to, we've been spending a lot of times in our personal units, but then as the Division of Student Affairs, really taking time out to figure this all out, because it's a first for all of us. It's something that none of us have encountered before, and trying to figure out what is going to be our new norm. And I personally appreciate a lot of the steps that the university has taken to, number one, make our students safe and make me safe as a staff member. And I'm not, trust and believe that if I didn't believe that, I wouldn't say it. Like, that's not who I am. But and so I do appreciate that. And I know that there are going to be mistakes because we've just not traveled this road before. But I know the intentions are well.
I appreciate that. Brock, do you have any, comments from your perspective?
I think professors are, trying to navigate this and figure out what it looks like to create space, both regarding coronavirus and this issue of race and racism. The reality is a lot of them, we're trying to figure out Canvas and Zoom and just the tools, as much as trying to figure out how to create those spaces. So there's a big learning curve there. But what I would really hope to see, I know in little pockets these types of creating space is happening, but on the big picture, it can often feel like what's happening is just a bunch of statements are being made, right? We're just getting a lot of emails and every department's making some kind of statement. But I think, and so hopefully students are experiencing in those smaller pockets and in the departments interaction beyond just the statements that are being made.
Wow, I think that's a great way to finish it off, with just pushing all of those who are watching to be somebody who doesn't make non-performative statements, non-performative gestures, but you mean what you say and you say what you mean. So to the work of introspection, to the work of dismantling racism, to the work of dismantling xenophobia, homophobia, to the work of establishing relationships with people and not impressionships, to the work of actually building unity and not uniformity, to the work of clinging and creating community within your own faith background and learning about people across other faith backgrounds, to the work of engaging and learning how to be human again. With that being said, we thank y'all for tuning in. To Zeus, to Shardina, to Brock, I extend my gratitude, not just for you taking time out of your professional life, but out of your personal life. And just being vulnerable and transparent and being yourself, honestly, because y'all know I'm gonna be myself, because I'm gonna get some food right after this. To those who are watching, to Stephen, Sharon, Ashley, Graham, I appreciate University Events and Special Ceremonies for making this possible. As always, catch us next week, Tuesday, 3 p.m. as we continue this conversation. We may tweak it a little bit, so you have to tune in to make sure you know how we're coming. But with that being said, if you want to go fast, go far. If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Stephen is going to switch to a slide right now. If you want to get in touch with me, and if you want to get in touch with our guests, feel free to contact me, and we will make that happen. You can see my contact on this slide, as well as our office website and email. With that being said, y'all have a great rest of the day. Enjoy the day and continue to not just go together, but grow together.